Hey, this is Josh. This is the third video in our library extravaganza here. I thought we'd switch gears, and being lazy, I wanted to just go to another height bookshelf and see what we have here. So we're going to get some potato heads out of the way and this crazy rock formation that I found by the tracks. A lot of iron ore and junk like that around. Just kind of delve in here. Starting from left to right. Now this is more themed, not really alphabetical order. So your Snaggletooth from Star Wars. And moving on here. So cool book. Philip Roth, not to be confused with Philip Roth, the dude who had, I believe, had writer's block for 50 years. Book about art. So I got a little theme going here. Romantic art. Not to be confused with the new series, but American Gods. Neil Gaiman, probably the most interesting contemporary author, except for a few of my favorites like Guy Kay. Got a little mixture of science and myth in this bookshelf in the next few rows. This was a book I got at a science fiction book club of all places, Intelligence and Nature. Daniel Dennett, if you want to read somebody who's challenging, Consciousness Explained. Really tough stuff. Great, good reader, or good writer. So I enjoy Daniel Dennett's stuff. Just a version of the Bible for use in the mythology courses and some journals and golden books. You gotta have a golden books. Here's a golden book of birds. Little Lucy's Child, Donald Johanson, a sort of follow-up to his discovery of Lucy's, probably outdated at this point, fairly a lot of it, although he wouldn't like me to say that. Now, this one's a trippy book, very bizarre. Middle Earth, the idea of Mediolanum, a line running sort of diagonally southwest to northeast through Europe, through Spain, France, and a lot of place names are founded after that. But this guy, Graham Robb, fascinating nonfiction book about the Celts and what was lost when the Romans kind of destroyed them. Places and sort of this path of Hercules that gets followed as sort of an idea of a mythological landscape that the Celts had drawn out and sort of gotten is kind of overridden by the English, the French, the Romans, modern peoples, but it's still there. So everywhere from Milan, which it's long named as Mediolanum, this is a cool book. Yeah, so like that. Everybody has these art guides that they sometimes dip into, so I have that literally in pastels. And here we go. So I have a bunch of satire books I snagged up from here and there. This is the scope of satire, but I love satire and approaches to that. This is one of those weird ethnologies, the Irish countrymen, but there's no shortage of ethnologies depicting the Irish. Sci-fi book club, Celtic myths and legends, old stuff, pretty heavy duty. This is a big book, a lot of good ideas for it. No wonder it's near the Neil Gaiman, with a lot of ideas there. Just some essays. Kenneth Burke, Language as Symbolic Action, one of the well-known critical texts. This is a trip and a half. This is Snorri Sturluson, King Harold's saga. I've seen some of this stuff being taken up in recent Vikings episodes. Dude was working in Byzantium, invaded Denmark, invaded England, right just 10 years before Battle of Hastings. Very, truth is stranger than fiction sort of thing. So I'd recommend that. A lot of you probably heard of Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. This is the new Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, sort of a revamped, updated version of that book. If you've ever done this, I did this as a freshman in college. If you write it, draw upside down is the typical trick in there. But if you do this for about a month, you start seeing, figure and ground differently, and it's really worth kind of looking at. Whoa, we're getting there. Round signs attacking us here. This is a Romanian myth theorist and myths, dreams, and mysteries. Some of that's largely discounted now, but sort of Jungian. Troubling in its own way, as some of the later critics have found out that Eliade, Joseph Campbell, and some of them have gotten tied up with sort of ultra-conservatism in the World War II era. We know what that got equated with. So I read some books about these theorists that are problematizing them, but this is a neat one. He has some books on primitive mind and that sort of thing. This was my aunt's. My Aunt Barb went to SUNY Potsdam in the 60s, early 70s, and this was a book I found up in my grandfather's attic. Imagine $1.95 for the cost of this. Prose nowadays would be like $130 or some nonsense. I thought this book was something I could have gotten rid of. Naomi Wolf's letter, sort of warning to a young patriot, the 10 things that happen in democratic societies as they break down into fascism. With the advent of the Trump presidency, this is unfortunately newly timely, and that's a scary thing. But I've used this in a class one time, and more Bush era stuff, but it's back, as they say in the horror movies. If anybody hasn't ever read Steven Pinker, his latest book was on the decline of violence. A great way of turning around one's thinking about topics they think they know about. And this guy is very difficult to read. He's got just this style where he picks up weird phrasings, difficult phrasings, strange examples that almost like stop you. So it's a lot of annotation, a lot of reading. He's actually a cognitive neuroscientist, so there's that. This one was one of the best slams. It's called The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature. One of the best slams of literary criticism I've ever seen. So that's a cool book. And another one, these things are accomplishments just to kind of keep those reading, So usually I read a guy like that and alternate it with other writers as they come through. This is a classic anthropological tome, I guess you'd say, just, interpretation of cultures. Probably a lot of the stuff in that previous book is being debunked in back and forth there. So talk about difficult reads. I teach science fiction and fantasy, and this guy, Gene Wolfe, Sword and Citadel, the Book of the New Sun, almost impossible to understand, but it's more of an experience. And this book is one I haven't gotten through. You're kind of thrown into the middle of this huge turmoil. It's really tough to read and make much sense of. We're used to consuming that stuff pretty easily. This is just a style guide from Colgate. This is only the discussion of all of the cladistics, which is the theories of differentiating families and species and lineage. And if you want to learn how whales are connected to animals you wouldn't think so, read Dawkins. And Dawkins is great, not for his Twitter feed, which is pretty acidic for a lot of people, but great defender of evolution, an attacker of anti-scientism, which is a huge thing nowadays. So this is legit big book, a magnum opus, as it says on the front. So that's big stuff. This was the one that was a little nasty, the God Delusion. Sort of this idea that it's not okay to be an atheist in 2018 or 2011 or whenever this was written. And this book sort of looks at that, and why fewer than 50% of Americans believe in evolution. And there's Brontosaurus. So we'll move over here to the end this video out. I don't want to take too much longer. A soccer picture from 1987, Clifton Fine, all the usual suspects. Get these dudes out of the way. Glow-in-the-dark Triceratops. John Gribben. If you only learn science through the textbooks, you know, this is a great popular writer dealing with the sciences. He's probably got dozens of books. This is the history of science told through the lives of its greatest inventors. And neat book, but Gribben kind of revamped the way you look at science. This was in my grandfather Campbell's collection, and it's major writers of America. So I teach American Lit a lot, so you can see on the front all these men, without exception, men, except, yeah, no, there's Dickinson's on there. So it's one of those old anthologies. Talk about old anthologies. Classical Myth, Powell. There aren't that many of these, and I teach this every few years and try to always snag the latest edition of the mythology book. This is just the McCullough, John Adams, with of course the mini series cover. Try to get some readers. Almost done, and this will be a little frightening for those viewing at home, but yes, no. This is Mega Beasts, one of those books. There's a few people still doing these paper that fold out. Can't think of the name right now, but I have a Narnia book like this, and this one they're pretty well done. You know, 3D, freak out a little bit, so you don't need any glasses for that. And you know, back in the 80s, I was a geek, and Book of the Month Club was very cheap, and I remember picking this up and thinking, wow, this is great. Probably used it to prop up some monitors a few times in college, and I've gotten into it a bit, but you know, that's a heavy-duty thing. So that's my shelf of science, myth, and everything in between, and we have many more. So we'll be hitting those soon. Thanks.